Thank you for the landslide. I apologize up front. I'm going to be probably using subject and object. But we'll remember that it's just a linguistic form, right? Okay, well, happy Father's Day, everyone, and to the children of fathers. This is a story about my father and me and the healing we experienced. Hopefully, it speaks to a larger view of parents and children. Star Wars is an allegory that captures much of what I'll be sharing today. In the beginning, the father, Darth Vader, portrays a figure enslaved by a self-serving emperor. Some might call that the ego figure. Vader's arrogance, guilt, and anger are what maintain his loyalty to the emperor. As we see later in the backstory episodes, the murders of young Jedi learners and other revenge killings and the horrible disappointment that he left his secret wife with were the sources of his guilt that kept him enslaved. His son, who I've identified with, rushes to do battle with him, but he does not recognize his own father as his father, nor does he know of his own darkness. Luke is struck down and told the horrible truth that Darth Vader is his father. Luke, through great struggle, accepts the burden of his inheritance. He chooses to see the good in his father. This choice enables him to help his father step out of his own darkness and be forgiven, and thus defeat the emperor. I believe the ongoing popularity of this story, the original trilogy at least, has so meaningful that it has stayed in the culture. It's stayed so alive in the culture for years now. Now, my upbringing was difficult. I was a very shy kid, and most of the time I spent watching television, sleeping, or burying myself in various projects. Both my parents were drinkers, and angry outbursts were common, especially from Dad. Early on, I learned that if I provoked their rage, I could be braced for it. And afterwards, after the storm blew over, we could all relax and have a little peace. Unfortunately, that became a well-developed habit, automatic and unconscious. And I did not figure out till my mid-40s why people, especially men, were always getting angry with me. And I still continue it to this day because it's so deep and I don't always catch it. Now, my father's alcoholism and our codependency with that were full-blown. I did not even realize my dad was drunk until my friend in high school in my sophomore year told me, "Hey, your dad's drunk." Yet, his heavy drinking had been going on for 10 years. My father's teaching style was that he wanted you to know that he knew and you didn't. And I was constantly criticized, and I felt that I could never say it or do it right. And I remember one time I'm working on a bandsaw making a small cut, and he's behind me, and I was so accustomed to him yelling at me that fortunately I was braced for this because he yells at me don't do that. And normally you would jump, right? Well, I didn't. Thank goodness for these fingers. Now, my dad, he was very humorous, and frequently he would give his definition of a man. And that is, a man is a one-up, problem-solving approval seeker. At least that's what he believed that he was. He grew up in Charleston, West Virginia. His father was a very kind and well-loved traveling salesman. But Grandpa had long routes, which meant he was absent much of the time. So my grandma was raising the children, 3 of them, and she was a strict disciplinarian. She dragged him to KKK cross burnings and warned him to be good or the Klan would get him. He said that most of his family was so paranoid that compliments were met with suspicion. When my mom died in January of 2017, Dad said he would cry, but his mother beat it out of him. He said that she would beat him with a stick until he cried. Then she would beat him more to make him stop. As a result, my dad was both tough and very insecure, who learned to bolster himself by putting other people down. He grew up in a chemical town in Charleston, West Virginia, and he had his own lab in the basement and his own informal chemistry club. And in those days, you could buy any chemical around the corner. And he tells me this story that he was doing an experiment one day and the lights were flickering. And his mother yells down, "I don't know what you're doing down there, but stop it." As a result of his interest in chemistry, he went to Charleston, West Virginia, West Virginia University, I think in Mount Highland, until World War II broke out. And then during the war, he was a lieutenant in an engineering battalion training in Mississippi. Now, all of his racist upbringing was thrown in his face because he was a group of white officers overseeing a black battalion. And while on the one hand, many of his stereotypes were constantly reinforced by the white officer cadre, he had a friend who was a sergeant, a black sergeant, who he spent a lot of time with. And he told me they tried to go out for dinner one night in a little bar. And the owner of the bar came over and told them that they better get out of there or trouble would happen. That was my dad's first view into what it's like for a black man. But he still maintained his basic racism. His group, his battalion, had gone to the West Coast, and they were only days away from shipping to Japan. Germany had already surrendered. But the atomic bomb, the 2 drops, stopped their deployment. And if it wasn't for that bomb, I might not be here, those bombs. After the war, Dad gave up on chemical engineering and went to medical school. When he was all done, he was certified in surgery and radiology. Dad had a long and well-rounded education. He was very intelligent, witty, and funny. We moved to Michigan in '64 so Dad could join a thriving radiology practice. Unfortunately, the new hospital forced the closing of that practice in 1970. So for the next 13 years, he commuted 4 days a week, 90 miles one way, and 1 day a week, 60 miles one day, 1 day a week. He was the only radiologist in a small clinic, so that meant no more vacations. But we managed to have vacations by going camping closer to where he worked. During this time, his drinking and abuse steadily increased. But ironically, he'd still get up at 4:30 in the morning, do a complete set of military exercises, and go to work even in snow and ice storms, and he almost never got sick. In 1983, he was arrested for drunk driving. They found booze in both his radiology offices, and he was fired at age 59, my age. After 2 bouts of rehab, AA, and my mother's constancy, he stayed sober for 34 years. He was sober, but the inner tumult that drove him to drink still plagued him and his family. Still, he loved us as best he could. Once a week, my brother and I would receive a letter starting in the late 70s when we went to college, until he couldn't write very well just a few years ago. He would send us a letter. Always up early, Dad would be doing his exercises into his 90s, then making his own breakfast and on to his many activities. Yard work. He had a wood shop in the basement. He built shutters for the house. My mom was a toll painter, so he built all the wood boxes and plaques that she painted on. He loved to go fishing and hunting, go to his AA meetings, and go downtown every day shopping whether he needed to or not. On a blustery day at age 93, 7 days before what would have been his 94th birthday, he was helping me clean up 17 big bags of leaves, bending over at the waist to the ground. When we were done, I said that I was a little sore. He looked at me with a twinkle in his eye and he said, "I'm not." Dad was accustomed to arguing with my mother, and after she passed, I became his new dance partner. He even called me dear. On our last year together started a little rough, and that last year consisted of about 100 days of me being with him. On top of dealing with his outbursts, I also had to navigate the fact that his memory was deteriorating. I was quite angry with him on multiple occasions, but a turning point happened when I said to him that he deeply hurt all of us with all of his anger. And we were having dinner, and it was kind of tense, and he said, "Don't you think I know that?" And I said, "Why don't you stop?" That changed something in me. Before this, when I was angry, I would feel hurt and get angry back at him. After that, when he would shriek or yell or insult, I no longer felt hurt. But I would still raise my voice to match his, but I would have love in my heart and my eyes. He would catch on and frequently grin or smile. As I practiced this, my sense of compassion and forgiveness blossomed. I could see the frustration he was experiencing, and I could see all that he suffered that made him that way. I often hugged him and told him that I loved him. And one time when I told him I loved him, he says, "I love you more." It caused me to think of all that he had actually done for me while he was working so hard. And I realized, damn it, he did love me more. I think I'm just looking at the same page all over again. Okay. Now, Not long after that, I was hugging him again. And it came over me like a wave. That everything that that little boy in me ever wanted from him, that I needed, thought I needed, felt I didn't get, that's what I was supposed to give him right then. And something just cracked in my heart, and without a word, it happened. I gave it to him. Just all that love. And from that point on, which was about 3 months before he passed, attaboys just started coming out of our mouths. And instead of the old way of, oh, you did that really well. Yeah, what do you mean by that? It was, thanks. It was, attaboy, thanks. It was a healing for both of us. And it was what we both needed. It was more than I could do. I felt like I was being helped from Spirit. More and more, I could see the boy in the man and give that boy love. It was so healing that that's why I think Star Wars was so popular. Like, because Luke saw the Anakin Skywalker in Darth Vader. But now it is for me and Luke to deal with our own darkness, what we've inherited. We carry that now, but we have the ability to forgive and love and be forgiven. So thank you. Happy Father's Day.